In this episode, let's talk about where we're going. This is our route. If you've watched previous episodes, you may notice that it looks similar to the route from episode number 2, when we were planning to go all the way across the USA in one fell swoop. However, one of the things we decided on our test run around the Olympic Peninsula was that 2 months is a long time to be away from home. Plus, we want to do this in chunks, so we can refine our tactics based on real experience before we begin Phase 2. And that's why we're just going about halfway this time. And where is about halfway? Basically, it's Denver. That's almost 1,500 miles from our home outside of Seattle, and it's a city big enough to have Amtrak. In case you didn't know this, Amtrak is the main passenger train system in the United States. And since many Amtrak routes offer roll-on bike service, it's one of the best ways in America for a cyclist to get to and from a start or end point for a journey. However, it's also one of the worst train systems in the world because it doesn't go to a lot of places. And compared to trains in Europe, the few places it goes very slowly. So, since Denver, or to be precise, Fraser, Colorado, was one of the few places where our original route intersected with Amtrak, it became the place for us to plant that about halfway flag. Another change from the original plan is that we are lucky to have a couple of friends joining us for the first part of our journey, Chris Heinlein and Tony Medina. I've ridden a lot of miles with both of them, and I think we will all have a great time together. Anywho, back to the route. We're starting from Bainbridge Island, on the other side of Puget Sound from Seattle, Washington. That's where we all live. We will dip our wheels in the salt water of the Sound to be purists, and for those that think we should start from the Pacific Ocean, let me remind you that we went there in July when we did the first shakedown tour, as shown in episode number 4. So that counts. From Bainbridge Island, we take the ferry to Seattle, bike across the city, over Mercer Island, and down to Issaquah. After staying in a hotel that night, we will take a quick peek at the Snoqualmie Falls and then get on the Cascades-Palouse Trail. We'll stop for lunch in Bend and then climb for over 20 miles, fortunately at a grade of less than 2%, on a gravel trail up to Snoqualmie Pass. We go through a 2-mile-long tunnel there, very dark and very, very cold up at the top. Fortunately, we will have lights. On the other side, we stop at our hotel for the night. The next day, Tony will head for home, while the rest of us descend the east side of the Cascades-Palouse Trail all the way to Ellensburg, our next overnight. East of the Cascades, things should be drier and warmer. We will have a long final day on the Cascades-Palouse Trail with almost 70 miles of sandy gravel and few services before we leave the trail and angle down to Othello and our hotel. We will reward ourselves with a short next day to Connell, almost all paved since we're now off the trail network, and then one more long, hard day to Pomeroy. From Pomeroy, we climb gently for about 10 miles, then descend less gently for 12 miles to the Snake River. We follow that to our first state line crossing into Idaho at Lewiston, where we will grab some lunch and say goodbye to Chris, who plans to start home from there, although he may come to his senses and stick with us for a bit longer. Insanity is contagious, you know. Either way, in Idaho, we continue along the river to Orofino, maybe stopping at a winery along the way. After sleeping in a hotel there, we continue south the next day through a couple of small towns before entering the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest for our overnight at Three Rivers Resort on Highway 12. We continue up Highway 12 the rest of the way through the National Forest to Lolo Hot Springs. It's a long day with a lot of climbing and virtually no services, so we will take the next day off to soak in those hot springs, one of Carol's favorite things to do. After that rest day, we leave Idaho and cross into Montana. We will go up into Missoula for lunch and a stop at Adventure Cycling headquarters before going south through the Bitterroot River Valley to Hamilton. There's another winery near there, so we may roll into town a little wobbly. We continue down the Bitterroot Valley the next day, then begin a long climb that takes us briefly back into Idaho at Chief Joseph Pass. Back in Montana, we stay at about 6,000 feet altitude to the small town of Wisdom and our hotel. The next day, we're gently climbing to Jackson, and then more serious climbing over Big Hole Pass and Badger Pass before we descend for almost 20 miles to Dillon and our hotel. Our next 2 days are long ones, with a broad mix of options for supplies on the route. We start by heading northeast from Dillon to Second Breakfast and Twin Bridges, then southeast through a few small towns and over one lump to Enos. Our hotel there is above a casino. That'll be a first. There aren't as many towns between Enos and West Yellowstone, but the views along the Madison River and Hebgen Lake should make up for it. We will spend our last night in Montana just outside of the west entrance to the park at an overpriced and possibly funky hotel. From there, we will have 2 very full days. After seeing Old Faithful, Buffalo, and gorgeous vistas while trying not to be killed by distracted RV drivers or bears, not to mention riding about 75 miles with 4,000 feet of climbing, we will exit Yellowstone National Park and enter the Bridger-Teton National Forest to stay at an egregiously expensive place at the Headwaters Campground. Then we bike through the Tetons with a 17-mile climb to the Continental Divide before descending 30 miles to our next hotel in Dubois. The next couple of days should be even more fun as we pass through the Wind River Reservation, through Crowheart and Fort Washakie, where Sacagawea is supposedly buried, to Lander. Since we will have been on the road nonstop for another week by now, we stay here for 2 nights before heading east for Jeffrey City. This is a rough day. Although not far, it's got some tough climbs and almost nothing along the way. It's a day for pacing ourselves. I'd like to say that Jeffrey City to Rawlins will be easier, but that would be an exaggeration, if not a lie. At least there's supposed to be a small convenience store about a third of the way on the route at Muddy Gap. Otherwise, the highlight may be the climb that comes just before the descent into town. The next day, we get to bike on an interstate highway. We actually ride on I-80 for almost 10 miles before heading south at Walcott. We will grab something to eat in Saratoga, then stay the night in Riverside, just outside of encampment. Our last day in Montana is short but lumpy. There's not much between our hotel and the state line, and then just an RV park before Cowdery that may have services. In Walden, Colorado, we will be in a hotel above a bar, but at least I don't think it has a casino. Walden to Fraser has a few more towns, but also more miles and a lot of climbing. We will go over Willow Creek Pass at 9,500 feet and then go through Granby before we get to Fraser. From Fraser, we catch Amtrak to the San Francisco Bay Area, and from there we catch a train back to Seattle. It will be a slow trip, but we've got sleeper accommodations for both legs. Our goal is to test ourselves and our equipment, enjoy beautiful scenery, spend time with interesting people, and just have fun.